Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Saint-Martin. I'm the coordinator of the research chair on mistreatment of older adults, and I'll be your host for today's episode of Great Targets. Today, we have the pleasure of receiving my mentor and our former chairholder, Professor Marie Beaulieu, with whom we'll take a walk down history lane to look at how the field of research on mistreatment got to where it is today. So, Marie, welcome. And would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, thank you, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be there with the chair. What could I say? Maybe the fact that I've been involved in the field of countering mistreatment of older persons for almost 40 years, actually. I started in 1987, which
Okay.
kind of a long time ago. I'm more from the scientific perspective, less from the practice perspective. However, a lot of research projects I did in my career were done with practitioners and also policymakers. So I would present myself as someone who is very conscious about the interaction between research, policies, practice, and giving voices to older person and also to their caregivers when they have some or family members. So, a broad perspective. And as you said, I had the pleasure of being the chairholder of the research chair of mistreatment of older person for 12 years. So from 2010 to 2022, when I retired from University of Sherbrooke, and now it's Mélanie Couture who is there. And it's important to say that that chair that is funded by the Quebec government was the first one in the world and was recognized in that way. Now there's a second one at University of Toronto, but the Quebec chair is still a leader in the field.
Personally, I became aware of the issue of mistreatment a long time after you started. I think I became aware of it in 2010s, early 2010s, when they launched the first publicity campaign about the new helpline at the time. But I know for sure mistreatment had been recognized a long time before that as a social issue, and not only in Quebec but also internationally as well. But I couldn't quite place where it started, and I think you're a good person to ask. So, can you tell our listeners and watchers who are kind of in the same boat as me and don't quite know where mistreatment kind of came from, how it came to be?
Yeah, well, I'm quite inspired by an American sociologist, which is Herbert Bloomer. So, Bloomer recognized 5 steps so we can recognize social problems as also being a reflection of social behaviors. The first one is recognition, the second one is legitimation, the third one is mobilization, the fourth one is policy making. And finally, the last one is policy implementation. And I must say that for the past 50 something years, we went through all those phases. So, to answer more directly to your question, I'm going to go with some dates. And the
Mhm.
first one would be 1973. And we see the first scientific paper which is published on the topic. Published in a journal called Social Problem. So already there we are framing it as a social problem. But at that time we really didn't have all the words to say it. So it was written by Stannard, and the title, listen to this: Old Folks and Dirty Work, the Social Condition for Patient Abuse in a Nursing Home. So
Is this the one you told me about when I first started working with you, where they called it granny battering?
it was another one on the same
Okay,
year, but that's
okay.
true. Yeah, but you're totally in that line. So it's dirty work. It says something, huh? The really working in nursing home, and the other one was granny battering in the same year. So, but standard is the first one, and the other one is the second one. So it was really important to see that we were beginning of targeting a problem, but the words really to explain it were not clear. But there was something going on that was bad, especially in care institutions, because those two papers we're talking about are actually placed in care institution. So we were not at that time looking at elder abuse or mistreatment of older adults in the family, and we were not also looking at it in the public space. So
It's kind of
first thing.
funny goes contrary to what we see today because the focus tends to mostly be on what's going on in homes right now.
Exactly, exactly. But these papers were written by practitioners that were seeing a lot of things. And probably at that time, maybe there were less practitioners going in homes, in private homes than now. So that could be one way of explaining it. So that's the point of view for research. Now we're looking at it, and we went to so many steps. Actually, we see that in international organizations, there are kind of three paths that are followed. The first one is looking at the problem as a political issue, and we will come back later on this. The second step, more by research, would be the knowledge development. And the third one, which is really important, is also all that action building. So, how we can create intervention and have some specific action to counter the problem in connection with other problems, such as intimate partner violence or violence against women, but also family violence that will look at people from all age that can go through violence in the family.
Mm-hmm.
So if I go again with steps, 1977, there's a conference of the International Conference or Association of Gerontology and Geriatrics, and a group decided to create the International Network for Prevention of Elder Abuse. Because it's a scientific conference, it's mainly scientific persons that are there. However, in 1999, so 2 years after, it's recognized by the UN as a very important NGO. And then it's policymakers, it's people in the field that will be together to push forward a series of issues. And maybe we could come back on it because in its way, NPIA is really important. 2002, another milestone, which is actually two milestones in 2002. The first one will be by the World Health Organization that organized a seminar in Toronto. And they decided for an international definition of the problem, which is called the Toronto Declaration. And this definition, we're like almost 23 years later, this definition has evolved, but its background is still very solid and it's still quite used.
And when we talk about the definition, when we presented the terminology in other episode, we talked about it as the kind of the source where it all started. So it's still going on. The idea of a relationship of trust and all of those things were set up there, and they're still being used in the definitions today, right?
Exactly. And it's still recognized as being the ground for the rest. And because it was in Toronto, all Canadians are very happy about that also. I was invited to go to that session, and I couldn't because I was teaching, but I sent one of my graduate students. So I can say that the team that would become the chair a few years later was already part of that. Also in 2002, there was by the United Nations a big international meeting in the launch of a report which is called the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging. And in this plan, there's a recognition of the problem. It's really framed that we have to counter neglect, violence, and other issues regarding older person. And in that plan, which is also recognized, is the fact that older person can be abandoned by their close ones. And that's interesting because it's not always included in the definition of mistreatment of older adults.
Yeah, it kind of is the ultimate manifestation of neglect, I guess.
It is indeed. And actually, when we do interviews with older person in different research projects, we will find that for them, this issue is really important. However, it's not really clear in the definition that it is part or not of what is recognized as mistreatment. Then, in 2010, the civil society at the United Nations was really pushing for a better recognition of the rights of older persons. So it started by a working group that went on for years and years and years in New York. And I had the pleasure of going to that meeting probably 5 or 6 times. And it was really important because each time I was going, I was not using my research chair hat because there's no place for researchers at the UN. So I was there as the civil society, but using research results to actually present when I was talking over there. So I was there with the INPIA. So that has been going on for a long time. And we are very happy to see that in 2025, they started at the UN in Geneva this time to craft an international binding instrument that will recognize the rights of older person. And we know that countering mistreatment is actually looked as a double issue. It is a social problem, but also it is a question about recognizing rights. And maybe the other milestone that is important is in 2013, the UN named an independent expert on the rights of older person, and that expert is really doing a tour of the world and countrying, fostering different issues related to rights, and did very good reports on mistreatment of older person. And my last but not the least, you're part of it, I'm part of it. In 2025, finally, there's a mega map that was published on mistreatment of older adults. And this mega map looks at what we know and what is to be addressed but has not been addressed yet. And we're looking at prevalence. We're looking at what we call determinants. So the characteristic also of the older person, but the people or the organizations that will abuse them. It looks at consequences of abuse, and it's also looking at intervention.
And for our listeners and viewers, I'm probably going to do an episode soon about the mega map and what it is. So if you want to know more about that, you can come back and listen to me explain a bit in simpler word what a mega map is, because it's kind of a complicated piece of research. But yeah, if you want to learn more, just come back around in a few weeks, few months, and we'll have an episode about that. I just wanted to touch on something you named earlier. You said that the idea that mistreatment could be framed under a rights protection perspective was something that emerged somewhat recently. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
It's really interesting because a lot of time we've been looking at elder abuse or mistreatment as problems of not recognizing the needs of older person. So, and when we're talking about needs, it's more related to the field of social problems. And even if it's important to recognize the needs and actually to assess the needs and propose correct answers, addressing it to a rights perspective is totally different because when you're looking at someone or a group with rights, you're really starting by saying, we recognize them as a group and we have to do things that will foster those rights. So it's kind of a tool that is more powerful and it's less like the victim side, but more the empowerment side when we're looking from a rights perspective. And what we've learned, especially through the UN, is that when you have a convention, international convention that become binding instrument, it will really propulse the response to the problem. And we saw that with people with disabilities. Now that they have a binding instrument, all the countries that signed that convention have to report on a regular basis on what they're doing. And we see that a lot more is done because they are really seen as being acknowledgeable about what they're doing or not. Same thing for the rights of children. So it's kind of bizarre to see that we never recognize rights for older person, and some persons who are seeing it from a small part of the lens will say we don't need a convention for older person because we already have the one for people with disabilities. And my answer, and the answer of others in my group, is that no, no, not all older person are with disabilities. So it's not at all the same thing. You can have rights as a senior citizen, even if you're not disabled.
Mhm. I guess that's where the idea that we've seen running around over the last few years of a charter for the rights of older adults comes from.
Exactly. Yeah. So when I'm talking about a binding instrument, I'm talking about a charter of rights, but where actually, and even a convention is stronger because a convention people have, countries have to sign. So they're even more, there's more pressure on them when they sign a convention.
And another thing you touched on earlier is the International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. You stated that it was an organization that kind of was at the origin of NGOs' activities in the field of prevention of mistreatment of older adults. Can you tell us a bit more about the role that this organization played?
Yeah, it was founded by the late Rosalie Wolf. She was an American researcher, and the work has been done very rapidly to be assured that this organization would be recognized first by the IAGG, so the International Association of Gerontology of Geriatrics, but also by the UN as a proper NGO. And that was done in 1999. And since then, the network has been very proactive, and maybe I could give you what is exactly what you want to do. It really aims to increase society's ability through international collaboration to recognize and respond to the mistreatment of older people in whatever setting it occurs, so that the later years of life would be free from abuse, neglect, and exploitation, while at the same time acknowledging the diversity of culture, background, and lifestyle of the world population. So they are international. They have to recognize that in certain countries, certain things are seen as mistreatment and it's not in others. It's probably the best example is in certain countries in Africa, witchcraft is recognized, accusing someone of witchcraft is recognized as a part of abuse, which actually here in Canada, we don't hear quite a lot about it.
Yeah.
So what has been done by the NPIA, but a lot of things to increase the public awareness. They promote education and professional training. They will do advocacy on the behalf of abused and neglected elders, and they will stimulate research on the cause, consequences, prevalence, treatment, and prevention of abuse and neglect. One of the things that we saw as a very important activity was the recognition of the World International Day on Mistreatment of Older Adults, which is June 15th. So we call it in Quebec the Purple Ribbon, so a campaign. But this is major because at least once a year we talk about mistreatment of older person. And it's quite interesting because firstly it was the day proclaimed by NPIA, but finally the UN a few years later said, oh yes, we will recognize that. So now it's International Day. Another important thing that is done by NPIA is being present at all the steps at the UN, both in New York and in Geneva. So each time we're having a group working on older persons, and PIA is there as an NGO to really be part of the discussion and push for some changes.
Very interesting. And is it still active today?
It is indeed. I'm a little bit biased because I'm a fellow of that group, but yeah, it's still active. Recently, I received an email asking who will be in New York for that meeting or who will be in Geneva. Maybe we saw them a little bit less, but usually in all big conferences, there are some sessions on mistreatment of older adults. It would be at the GSA, the Gerontological Society of America. It will be each meeting of the IAGG, so the International Association of Gerontology and Geriatrics, and also every conference of the IFA, International Federation of Aging. So the next conference of the IFA is actually in September 2025. So maybe people are listening to this podcast and it's already done. And we're having a seminar. Actually, I organized a symposium on mistreatment of older adults, and we're using both the perspective of the NPIA and also another big NGO, which is the International Longevity Center.
I guess your answer is going ahead and answering my next question, which was if you feel like mistreatment is still a worldwide political priority, because if the NPA is still going to the UN and doing stuff like that, it is. But on the other hand, are you afraid that it won't remain a priority in the coming years?
I think your question is really important because I'm positive when I'm answering from the point of view of NPA, even though I think we could do a lot more, but we can always do a lot more. But maybe I could take a few steps back and share with you some results of research and international research I did with WHO a few years ago. And we published a paper in 2022 on the global political priority regarding mistreatment of older adults. And so the first author is Chris Migden, and we could actually give the references later on.
I will put it in the description.
Yes, please. So having a political priority for mistreatment of older adults is challenged by at least 5 things. The first one is the inherent complexity of the issue. So we always have to explain what it is, and people will say, who's the abuser? Well, it could be a person, it could be a group, it could be an institution, and so things like that. It is impacted by ageism, so it's more difficult to recognize the problem because of ageism in different societies. We still think that there's insufficient awareness about the topic. In certain countries, it is well discussed. In other countries, it's still under the radar. There's still doubts and uncertainties about the estimated prevalence. And when we look at the results, and you're going to talk about it when you're going to talk about the mega map, the results are so different from one study to the other. And then it becomes intractable. So its intractability is really having an impact also on it. So I'm not saying that it's easy. And what we find out is that we could work more with other groups. Like it would be pleasant to have more collaboration with groups like Violence Against Women, because a lot of time violence against women are not looking at older women. It seems that once you reach menopause, you're forgotten by that group. So that's an issue. It could be also looked at it differently when you're looking at violence at all ages and all contexts and everything. So we still need to push. I think if we have a convention on the rights of older person, it's going to be a step. Now we will have to see which country signs it and which country don't sign it, and also what will they be doing. So when we prepared the mega map, I guess you remember that we find out that many studies and many documentation of the problem are done in high income countries. Yeah. So there's a lot of countries which don't have all the information and that are actually not documenting the problem. So yes, I'm positive, but I know we have a lot of challenges to face.
Yeah, but so we can say that the field has progressed a lot worldwide, even in those countries that have less document about it. We've seen some movement around the years, but there's certainly much left to do. How would you describe the overall state of knowledge on mistreatment right now?
when I started almost 40 years ago, there was nothing, or actually, it was kind of easy to do a lit review. You didn't have to look that much. Now you have a plethora of papers that are published on mistreatment of older adults. Some people are more critical, will say that the scientific knowledge is not always at the top. One of the things that is really difficult is to evaluate the impacts of intervention and the impacts of different awareness campaigns in order to reduce the prevalence of the problem or to actually give an answer to the problems that will suit the older person's needs and wishes. So we still have a lot to do, even if a lot has been done. And we understand that it's kind of difficult in research protocols, especially on intervention. You cannot say that we will give some intervention to a group of people that we know have been abused and we will not give it to the others, because there would be an ethical problem in the
Yeah.
way of doing the research. The other thing is that you cannot provoke mistreatment to see how people react. So there's a series of things you cannot do. You have to study in natural settings what is happening, and that is always a challenge because there's so many variables that can influence the problem, the answer, and what is going on, including the way that practitioners are trained or not, and the way that services are given or not in different countries and even part of countries, because there's no single response for Canada. There's a series of different responses all around the country.
Over the years, like you said, we've seen a lot of progress. We started with granny battering and dirty works with old folks. We've moved on to the inception of the International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, and then we had the 2002 declaration with the first definition, and now the mega map and all of those activities. What would you say in this progression line would be the next big step that the field needs to take? What's the next area of knowledge that we need to go toward?
Um, there's still one thing that is really important is to recognize that the definition of mistreatment of older adults cannot be only one. There will be different definitions and they will evolve over time. And I know some people are less do less agree with me when I say that, because they want one frame definition and saying then we're going to be sure that we are always measuring the same thing. No, it is a social problem. It has to evolve. So that will remain a challenge, but we need to do that to recognize the evolution of the problem and the evolution of the knowledge. The other thing is we still need to try to find what type of intervention work in which context, and really to foster those things as model. And I know the WHO put in place a few years ago what they call an intervention accelerator, and I think this is a path to follow. And maybe Melanie could talk more about it because now
Well,
she's part of it.
she actually did. We had an episode where we talked about a paper that was published about the intervention accelerator. So that's something that our listeners and viewers can go listen to also.
Yeah, well, I think that's really, really important. The other thing that is important to me is we look at consequences of abuse, but a lot of time we will look at consequences only in a short time period. I had the privilege of doing a research a few years ago that was funded by the Quebec government on mistreatment of people with disabilities. And we did interviews with people who went through mistreatment in the past 5 years. And some of the people from whom the abuse occurred like 3-4 years ago were talking about immediate consequences, but also long-term consequences. And I think that we still need to continue to work on that, because it means that when you have long-term consequences, maybe you need some type of accompaniment for a longer time and in different ways, because you will evolve in your situation, but actually is if the pain is still there and it can be a psychological pain, well, actually, you will not be able to have a good well being in your life.
Mhm. Uh, Thank you very much for your time. I think that was all the questions I had. Is there anything you'd like to add before we stop?
Well, I hope that people will continue to be involved in the field. I hope that we're going to have strong policies and strong services. This morning we were talking about the international point of view, but we know that policies and services are more national and sometimes local. So let's continue working together and let's put the voices of older person at the center.
Well, thank you very much, Marie. And for our viewers, thank you for being here. Don't forget to leave a like and share the episodes around. And see you next time. Bye, everyone. Before you go, if you are in the province of Quebec, we just want to remind you that if you have concerns about mistreatment, if you believe you are being mistreated, if you witnessed a situation, or if you are a professional facing a complex situation, you can reach the mistreatment helpline by calling the 1-888-489-2287. It's a provincial helpline that is fully bilingual and available 7 days a week from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So 1-888-489-2287.